Desert racing can be a lonely endeavor. With motos and most of the UTV class, it's pretty much you against the desert. But in the big truck and buggy races, most drivers don't go it alone. The co-driver is important, acting as spotter, calling out turns and danger spots, and warning if someone's coming up from behind.
That co-driver's job is to watch out for you, because he's watching out for himself, too.
Sometimes the co-driver is part of the pit crew, a mechanic, maybe someone who races in another class, or in the case of John Martinson, it's his wife, Maria.
Yeah, she tells me left, right, straight.
Hard left. Sometimes
hard left.
I call a wrong turn, but...
Sometimes she says left and it's right, and I yell at her a little bit. That's racing.
And it seems to be working. The Martinson team is the two-time Class 1 champion for the Whiplash Series, and last year they won the overall points lead for the Truck and Buggy Championship. That's pretty good, considering John runs a four-cylinder, four-seat pre-runner with about 20 inches of suspension front and rear. A true Class 1 car will have a V8 engine and over 30 inches of travel all around. So how does he do it?
Whiplash Series, the courses are much tighter and much more technical. We don't ever have straight roads where you can go 140 miles an hour for half an hour. We're constantly turning, and that equalizes the playing field for us.
Now, if there's any car out here in need of an equal playing field, it's this familiar old soul.
We've actually had racers come by and say, how in the heck does that car make it around the course?
Well, actually, it makes a lot of sense. You could argue that Ferdinand Porsche was the father of desert racing, because when folks out west figured out what they could do by sticking a Volkswagen suspension and engine on a tube chassis, desert racing was born. Now, this particular desert racer was born when John and Jim Nightingale scooped it up for $900 about 7 years back. In its first few years of action, the brothers raced it with a mere bone-rattling 5 inches of suspension.
We actually were allowed to use the stock seats for 2 of the races, and so everybody laughed at us, but it gave us that extra inch of suspension in the seat.
The Bug's certainly not the fastest out here, but the old-school look transcends speed.
A trophy truck can go by, a $1 million vehicle can go by, and people just sit there and watch. But when we go by, almost everybody's on their feet, cheering us on.
Now, one of the favorites out here today should be Danny Sullivan and Dwayne Anderson in their highly monsterized 1980 Toyota truck. This truck won this same race at the end of last year. The key to their success? Finding the edge of the truck's capability and not crossing that line.
You want to use your suspension just right to the limit. You've got 18 inches of travel, you want to get it within a half an inch before you use too much. When you use too much, you bottom out and you start braking or you start crashing.
But in the truck and buggy race, just because you brake doesn't mean your race is over. Dwayne brings an impact wrench, a shovel. There's an extra drive shaft and spare motor oil. Dwayne will bring 2 fuel pumps, 2 batteries, and a spare tire with jack, all for good reason.
Every racer breaks down. You know, I mean, it's going to happen. You have to know how to limp it back in or have to MacGyver yourself enough to get it back to the pits.
In fact, in a race last year, Dwayne fixed a center link by welding it together with 2 line wrenches on each side. It worked so well, he decided to keep it as his spare. And today, these spares are going to come in handy, because up next, we've got carnage on the course.
I remember somebody interviewing Malcolm Smith, which, I mean, the man is a pioneer in the racing industry. He goes back forever. And they asked him, they said, do you still get nervous before each race? He said, when I don't get nervous before a race, I'm going to stop racing.
I've been racing since I was 16, so I try to think that I've done this a million times, and why do I keep getting nervous? But yeah, I mean, that's, my brother likes to call it, that's the fun part. That's your body telling you you're about to have fun. It's my body telling me I'm about to vomit.
Yeah.
And there's little time to get settled in at Vulture Mine, where the first 10 miles are the toughest. Today, the trucks and buggies all race together in 5 grueling 30-mile loops. Now, one little secret of desert racing is to wear your seatbelts a little loose and give yourself some play, because if you're strapped in really tight, you'll get beaten up.
This sport it's more like boat racing than car racing because, you know, probably 25% of the time you're not on the ground. And the car just kind of floats along the bumps, and you kind of direct it in the way you think it needs to go.
But even with that, 150 miles on Vulture Mine begins to take its toll.
When you're dressed in your fire suit, you have a helmet on, you're enclosed in a car, you're out there and you're getting dehydrated. You don't realize it right away, but when you're coming in, you can kind of feel yourself falling off each lap.
But today it was the parts that were falling off before the drivers. Our VW Bug got just 2 laps under its belt before it was done in by the sand washes. This truck lost an oil pan. Now they managed to fix it in the field, but in the scramble to get it done, they left the replacement oil too close to the track, and that was that. Yeah, it's just that kind of day.
Probably 50 to 60% of the cars are still out there on the track broken down.
And one of them is Danny Sullivan and Dwayne Anderson's Toyota. A little part, big problems.
This little $2 hose right here, because it cracked and split, it just cost us a $6,500 to a $7,000 motor.
As it turns out, if the motor didn't get the boys, the rear end would have.
We didn't know anything about that until we got it on the trailer. The only thing actually keeping this on the truck right now is the axle inside there and the shock. Look at that, what are you gonna do?
With a blown engine and a busted rear end, Dwayne's got his work cut out for him to get the old Toyota back in action. But somehow I get the feeling he'll make it happen.
What keeps you coming back is, I wanna win it. I'm in it to win it.
This sport's not for everybody, and you go out there and you beat up your equipment, you build these cars, you spend so much time and money, and then you go out there to tear them up,
At the end of the day, it's hard work, but I think it's great for the entire family, and we had a blast. As soon as my vodka medicine kicks in, I will be having a good time. How about you, honey?
I'm good. He was going to drop me off a while back, but I think I'm okay.
I think we'll keep her.